have an excellent technology warrior in our midst, or to my right. He's called Di Davis, and I think you know because you will have seen his bio online. You'll have seen the synopsis about this event. You know that we're making a general sweep, aiming this at AI for IT professionals. Well, in this day and age, it could almost be AI for everybody, AI for anybody, because that's the age we're at. What is AI? We know it, what it is. We've known it for years. And yet, all of a sudden, we find we're talking about LLMs. I think I know what that means. We're talking about agentic AI. We're talking about subsets of LLMs. We're talking about ChatGPT. Oh no, ChatGPT-4. Oh no, the latest version of, and then all of a sudden we're talking about something else, which is DeepSeek. And that's when we learn, as if we didn't know, that there are 50 or more shades of AI tools. Only? No. Is it 500? Maybe it is. And people are now worrying about what to do with AI agents. Why? I don't even know what the definition of an AI agent is, but I'm going to learn. And so are we all, because that's going to be the aim of our next few months. I'm hereby launching an initiative for us and the London branches on AI by you. And what that means is I'm going to invite you to prepare short presentations, 10 minutes maybe, which we can use in a webinar of our choice, because we will look at the submissions, we'll collate them into short videos and play them as part of webinars. AI by you. How do you use AI? What can you do with AI? Show us. And we'll thereby have sessions where perhaps we have some expert AI presenters, but certainly we will have things by a whole lot of our members, some of the 10,000 we've mentioned. It will be a wonderful time for you to do something small but significant to advance us and you and your career and UK AI initiatives. So there's a general sweep of where we are and where we're going. But now, patiently sitting beside me is our, fallen asleep? Yes, he's fallen. Is our fantastic presenter, Di Davis, who's come down from the wild and woolly North Yorkshire, is it? Yes. And is going to tell us more about AI myths and realities. Must be something to do with the wild Yorkshire moors and or all the strange creatures you see up there. Is that right, Di Davis?
Thank you, Bill. So occasionally I've been known to lecture about lecturing. And one of the things about lectures is never start with an apology. Here I am going to be starting with an apology. But the good news, ladies and gentlemen, is that the apology is not for you. The apology is for anybody else listening to this talk later because it's being recorded, or listening to it live, because my talks tend to be a bit more interactive. And obviously, if you're listening to it remotely, then you won't get the interaction. If anybody's bored during the talk, then there's a little task for you if you get bored, and the task is just to determine the rest of that sequence and tell me what it is. We'll come back to that later. So artificial intelligence, myths and realities of artificial intelligence. Well, I'm hoping to prove to you two things today. Number one, that it's not artificial, it's man-made. And number two, it's not particularly intelligent yet. And that yet is pretty important, I think. So what am I going to talk about? He says, if we can get this working. Ah, yes, that's true. I need the remote click. Thank you. David, any ideas? Well,
Tell chat GPT to do it.
yeah. Sometimes you shout next, and next slides will come up. I'll do a manual way. Let's see if this works.
We've got one called Sam.
You know, the two return.
Open the pod bay door, maybe.
Dave, I can't help you with that.
So what I'm going to talk about is
666.
what do we mean by artificial intelligence? You know, every single client of mine now says they have an AI solution. This is just the same as 10 years ago, when 12 years ago, maybe, when every single client of mine had a cloud solution. And then 5 years ago, every client of mine had a Bitcoin or a Bitcoin related solution. It's nonsense when people tell you they've got an AI solution. I've seen one or two applications of AI. One of the other things I'm going to tell you about is why we don't have and we're not going to have AI in this country, by which I mean ChatGPT, DeepSeek, Cloud, Claude, and how you pronounce it, and those sort of AI big ticket machine learning systems. So I'm going to talk a bit about where we are with artificial intelligence, how it's developed. I'm going to talk a little bit about what is artificial intelligence, not very much, because you don't want to hear definitions from me. I'm going to talk a lot about machine learning, because machine learning is what we have today. That's the subset of artificial intelligence that we have today. I'm going to talk a little bit about how to break AI, why AI doesn't work properly, and which bits of machine learning, which bits of AI do things better than you and I could ever do in a month of Sundays. So I'm going to look a bit at things where AI doesn't work, because I like to break things. I like to break things and work out why they don't work. But equally, I'll tell you a little bit about AI and what it can do well. Talk a little bit about confabulation, which is essentially in English making stuff up, and why AI does make stuff up. And I want to talk about, yes, I am a lawyer, and yes, we could have a whole load of law we could have talked about. Powerful law, wouldn't that be interesting? No. So I'm going to talk for about 2 minutes about the law, because really that's not very interesting. And a little bit about maybe where we're going with AI, and is it answer the question, is it dangerous or is it not dangerous? If so, what? So most of the stuff is going to be machine learning, and we'll get there. So first of all, where are we here? Where did AI come from? Where do we get to it? And I did say to somebody there were bulldozers in this talk, but we'll get to the bulldozers in a minute. Many years ago, one of the very first computer programs I ever wrote was a program to play backgammon. I didn't play backgammon particularly well, didn't play backgammon particularly badly. It was a very conservative program. It used to double up. It was a very defensive move in backgammon. And it didn't kind of think about 20 moves ahead. All it did was try and play a bit defensively when it played backgammon. Did it beat people? Not really. Maybe it won as many games as it lost, and it played against people. But it wasn't. It had no artificial intelligence in it of any consequence at all. It's not what I call artificial intelligence. It was just, as I say, I wrote it a little bit to play defensively. Of course, people have since then in the 1990s written chess programs, and about the late 90s, we had chess programs that did beat humans because they thought about X moves ahead. Is that artificial intelligence? Not particularly. It's just programming to make sure that you could imagine how you program it yourself, just thinking X moves ahead. Playing Go is a bit more challenging because there are an awful lot more potential moves in the game Go in the game of chess, and it took about another decade before people used computer programs to play Go as well as humans. But again, the way they were doing it is basically number crunching. All you're doing is you're thinking about X moves ahead, and you're putting the person in the best position. It's not quite how an individual would play, because an individual, particularly a chess player, would understand intuitively which were aggressive moves, which were defensive moves, and where to place the, or how to essentially play, without necessarily thinking in his mind about X moves ahead. AI is very good at recognizing pictures, some sort of pictures, animals, and of course, you hear a lot in the press about AI recognizing scans for medical situations, but actually, medical scans are pretty constrained. You imagine a medical scan, you're usually looking for darker or lighter colors on a black and white image, which you know what the image is going to be like anyway. And again, you could imagine how you're programming that. Is it really AI? Well, not the classic way, because medical imaging scanning has been around for 5 or 10 years. And all you're doing, as I say, is you're looking for particular types of patterns, pixels related to one another. You've got a patch of dark pixels, essentially. And are they within a certain range of other pixels, which are that shade as well? You could train a medical imaging scanner from ways. You could train a large language processing model, which I'm going to talk about. And again, that's just looking at statistically, these are the sorts of images which are benign, and these are the sorts of images which are not benign. And all you're doing is you're training something to look at lots and lots and lots and lots of pictures, and therefore work backwards from what those pictures actually mean. And the interesting thing is that, yes, it does work for things like animals and medical diagnosis. Lots of things it doesn't work for. So, some of you may have heard of Galaxy Zoo. So Galaxy Zoo is something that you can do at home tonight if you want to, which is basically identify galaxies. So we have these James Webb telescope that takes lots and lots and lots of pictures of literally billions of galaxies, and they want to categorize the galaxies. It turns out you can't write a computer program to do that. You can't use artificial intelligence to do that. It's just too difficult. It's a bit like the captcha that you sometimes have to, CAPTCHA, that you sometimes have to go through when you go to a website to prove that you're really a human. Does this picture have a bridge in it? Does this picture have a motorbike? It is. That's because computers can't do that very well. In fact, they can't do it at all, which is why that's used as a human one. Same thing with galaxies. It turns out that, a spiral galaxy, you can see it any particular angle. It may be a random angle and you won't be able to recognize it. Is it a spiral galaxy or is it a different type of galaxy? Is it a round galaxy? Whatever classification of galaxy. So you're on a Galaxy Zoo, you'll find that that's the sort of thing that humans can do much better than computers still. So AI is not, if you like, all things to all people. It has certain limitations. So these excellent systems, so some people transfer them. I could talk about terminology for an hour. I'm not going to. It's interesting that Alan mentioned agents. That's another bit of terminology. Try and not talk about terminology. Talk about stuff instead without using the terminology. We're trying to define stuff. We're going to define artificial intelligence in a minute. Well, I'm going to give you a definition of artificial. Is this really clever? Is playing chess, playing Go clever? Is it actually very intelligent? A guy called Noam Chomsky, who's a very famous mathematician in America, says it's about as intelligent, interesting as a ball. Which is true. Big deal. This computer can play chess better than me. Well, yeah, fine, but all it's doing is chuntering mathematically. I remember used to be a bridge player. Do you want to speak to me, Gary?
Please. Yes, if I may, sir. I've got a request saying that could you please face the audience, because otherwise the online speakers fluctuate in terms of.
Okay. So basically, it's basically the people online don't like me walking around. You guys can hear me. This is the green bits there. I've been bits and picking up. I'm going forward, flat, backwards. They're getting different volumes. I understand that. Okay, try and keep still. Very, very difficult.
Blew you.
Oh, I did make the apology when I started at least. So where was I? Yeah. So
Galaxy. Galaxy.
I was going to say that years and years ago, I used to play bridge. And one of the reasons I gave up is because I ended up playing bridge against mathematicians. And then afterwards, you know, we only took a drink afterwards, and they'd say, why did you beat this against this? Because mathematically, the probability of you winning was it. And I used to think, okay, I'm not clever enough to work out the maths in my head. You obviously are. It just wasn't much fun anymore. Again, it's like saying, I've got a big deal. This computer can play chess better than me because it's a computer. Fine. But say about as interesting as builders are winning a late competition. Who else would produce a definition of artificial intelligence in the European Union? Actually, interestingly, as I told you, I wasn't going to talk about much law. There's only 2 countries which actually have a AI law of any consequence. The first territory, I should say, is the European Union, and that one hasn't really come into force yet. They're still talking about how to bring it in force. And the other country is interaction. Sorry, no,
I think it's China, but
could be, but okay. I'll mention China later, but no,
Yeah.
not China. Anybody? Yeah, Canada.
Oh.
Canada is the answer. Which have an AI law as well. So obviously, if you have an AI law, you have to define what AI is. I actually don't think the European Union definition is particularly helpful, but here it is. Software is developed with machine learning and can, for a given set of human-defined objectives, generate output. Environments are active. I don't understand the influence environment they act with, because that kind of implies you have to have some sort of control system attached to it. Software that it talks about machine learning or knowledge representation using statistical analysis. I mean, to be fair, the systems that I'm going to talk about are essentially statistical analysis systems. That's what we have today, and we call artificial intelligence today. It is essentially machine learning, and machine learning is statistics, and that's all it is. It's clever statistics. I'm going to talk a little bit about how the statistics work. The issue with people saying, well, I don't know what the output is because there's a huge amount of statistics. So I'll try and give you some examples in a minute. If you think about the average English sentence, and most machine learning these days is about English sentences, you have subject, object, verb. The man hit the dog. That's what machine learning essentially does, is it reads huge amount of literature. By a huge amount of literature, I'm talking about percentages of a billion, I think a quarter of a billion books in the case of ChatGPT 3.5, more now, nearly 3/4 of a billion. In other words, they're reading huge amounts of literature. And then what they're doing when they're producing a response is they're thinking about the next most likely verb, the next most likely word. It's a word. So all you're doing is statistical probability of what's the next most likely word I'm going to say in this sentence. The way it does that is essentially by considering and looking at, because I'm not looking at it every single time, considering all of these bits of learning and looking at the most likely word. So the result of that is they can do some things very well. And the some things that they can do very well is it's like 99% of IT systems. Not everybody in this room I know is IT, but most people are IT. If I asked you what does RIRO mean? IT. Tell me what RI means in IT?
Read out.
Sorry?
Read in, read out. Rubbish in,
Sorry?
rubbish out. Rubbish in.
Rubbish in, rubbish out. Thank you. Rubbish in, rubbish out. In other words, you can have as great a computer program as you want, but if the data you input is rubbish, you're going to get rubbish as the output. It's exactly the same with machine learning. Most of the queries that most people ask most of the time of AI are common queries. I say common, but not common to you. Like, what is the? I asked AI, which we'll get to later. What is the sequence of those numbers? Most of the questions I asked were not necessarily mathematical, but that's fine. That's by the by. The point is, the most queries that people ask, and talk about queries in a minute, are perfectly understandable by AI, and they're understandable not because AI understands them, but because lots and lots of people have written about them. So let me give you an example. So if I asked AI to write me a one-page summary of the life and time of Queen Elizabeth I, it would write a very good summary, and it does write a very good summary of the lifetime of Queen Elizabeth I in a one page. You can try this at home if you like. And the reason why it does it is because literally thousands of people have written about the biography of Elizabeth I. You ask it, as soon as you ask it something which it hasn't really got much input on, then you get into the Riro areas. It doesn't really know what it's writing about, and therefore confabulates, which we'll look at in a minute. It's very easy to get it to confabulate, to make things up. But to be fair, AI does stuff very well. And so one of the things it will do, as well as any English professor that specializes in the life and times of Elizabeth I, is write me a one-page summary of Elizabeth I, the lifetimes of Elizabeth I, because it's got lots of input on it. And interestingly, if you ask it to do it twice, it'll do it slightly differently because there's got a bit of randomization in there as well. It's not, when it writes about Elizabeth I, it has actually no idea what an Elizabeth is or what the first is. It doesn't understand that Elizabeth I is a queen. It has no knowledge or comprehension like you or I do that Elizabeth I was the Queen of England. It doesn't know that at all. It's just producing random words in a sensible order, the most likely order. Somebody give me, usually I ask somebody to think about this at the beginning, and I didn't. So can anybody think of a really, really strange noun? The weirdest noun you can think of in 2 seconds. Nobody? Would I have to pick on somebody? Give me a really weird noun.
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
What's that?
Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious.
It's bad because it's kind of, it's a made up word. It's not.
Dodecahedron.
Sorry?
Dodecahedron.
Dodecahedron. Yeah, dodecahedron. I'll go with dodecahedron. Okay. So if you ask AI to write me a one-page, and I've done this, by the way, not with dodecahedron, not with weird word. If I ask AI to write me a one-page summary of the lifetimes of Elizabeth I and put dodecahedron somewhere in it, it will do it brilliantly. Far better than you or I could do in a month of Sundays. And the reason why it will do it is very simple. It will go through every single usage of the word dodecahedron and think, how can I put that in? How can dodecahedron put it in? Possibly by saying, well, in terms of dodecahedron having 10 sides, 10 sides? Then, this is the 10 sides of life that Elizabeth I had, or something like that. The point is, it will do it brilliantly. And I've done it with things like incapable, really weird. And it'll do it very, very well because it will look at lots and lots, and I mean lots and lots, possibly tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands in the case of the word like dodecahedron, and it will work out how to do that. Can a human do that? As I say, you could do that, and if I challenge you to write a life in times of first on one page, put the word dodecahedron in, I'm quite sure you could do it, but could you do it as well as AI? Probably not. And so if you think you can, then please try that at home when you've got the time. Whatever it might be. let's talk a little bit more about machine learning in the context of artificial intelligence. So the fellow on the top right-hand corner of your picture, as you're looking at it, is a nematode. The simplest nematode in the universe, or I should say in the UK, in the world, is a C. elegans nematode. And it has 302 neurons in its brain, or its nervous system has 302 neurons in it. Fruit fly has an order of magnitude of 100,000 neurons, and humans have 86 billion neurons in them. IBM have been trying to mimic a nematode, this nematode, because it's very well studied, because it's the simplest one, and essentially mimic the inputs and the outputs. I get the same outputs for the inputs, and they're still working on it. 302 neurons. Artificial intelligence does not exist in that context. All we have at the moment is something completely different, which is essentially machine learning, which is very clever, very fast statistics. What is the most likely? And how are those statistics come together? Well, essentially, AI learns, and when I say AI learns, I mean machine learning works by having large computers look at word patterns and give those word patterns different weights. In other words, man hits dog is much more likely than dog hits man. Because if you read lots and lots of literature, it will say things like man hits dog far more than it ever says dog hits man. And therefore it will give the man hits dog sequence, if you like, a lot more weight than the dog hits man sequence. I'm simplifying, but that essentially is what it's looking at. So it's looking at lots and lots of different patterns and which is the most likely pattern. And then it simply nudges the next word out. A bit like the penny arcade, you know, when you put your penny in and you hope the next penny is going to come out, and it happens if you're really lucky. That's how it's doing it. It's essentially nudging the most likely next word in the sequence. Very well, because it's got masses of input. So large language type models are regarded as a quote neural network. They're not a neural network in the same way as our brains, but they're a neural network in the sense that they're making associations from one thing with another, which is a bit like how our brain works, but it's not how the brain works. In a sense, it's a completely artificial system. And as I said, when a computer is giving you the life and times of Elizabeth I, it has no idea what Elizabeth I is. What we're essentially doing,
There's a question
in a
here.
large language model.
There's a question. So words, what about an onomatopoeia? Which is the sound of what we do, like, you know, oink oink said the pig, you know, but we say it in a certain way. So an onomatopoeia, the sound. I mean, or is it just picking up the word of that?
Well, at the moment, artificial intelligence as applied to sounds does work, but it's a different system.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I've not actually seen a system, a large language model which is built on sounds. So the short answer is no. I don't know that application. I mean, the applications which are most used or most exemplified from language models are either words or pictures. In other words, generating pictures. And we'll look at generating picture example or analysing pictures, as I've already looked at for many examples before. I mean, and also the problem with words is we haven't really got very far with being able to interact with computers with our voices, because everybody's voice is slightly different, accents are different, languages are different. and there's not as much input. We'll look at the input in terms of languages in the middle. But if you're thinking about putting in languages and creating a language model, first thing you have to say is, well, obviously, if you're creating an English language model, it's going to be completely different than a Chinese model or a French language model. And then leaving translation aside, we'll talk a little bit about bias, but leaving translation aside, you wouldn't make a French language model the same way as an English language model. In other words, if you are thinking about going back to the Elizabeth I example, when an AI model is generating life and times of Elizabeth I, is actually looking at the French language literature about the life and times of Elizabeth I and inputting those? The answer is probably not. Almost certainly it's biased against that. And if it wasn't, to the extent that it wasn't, is the translation actually accurate in the first place? Which is even more of an issue if you think about voice. As I said, essentially what's happening is you're generating the most likely words. The most likely things have weight. The most important thing to appreciate is that the amount of input is absolutely enormous. As I say, 250,000 books, and that was for ChatGPT 3.5. They don't actually publish the equivalent information for up-to-date models, but you're talking about even more input, probably up to the billion number of inputs. The interesting thing is that this is not entirely say artificial, machine generated, because they do essentially have trainers that ask really kind of difficult questions to ChatGPT, and then essentially train ChatGPT that's having the right answers. In other words, not all answers are necessarily correct. In fact, you can find an example very easily of an answer that's not correct, and then they train the model in the same way as you train a human. So people are employed to essentially past tense quite a lot to actually train these models, because they don't always produce the right answer. Come to when I talk about DeepSeek later, then that's again relevant. So I talked an awful lot about what it does. I think I'm going to skip the bits about business application of large language models. Let's talk a little bit about why this kind of technology is not going to exist in the UK. It's quite interesting that
I know. All the best people, they've gone to Silicon Valley.
well, you just not. No, that might well be the case. But also, and you know, the England is a nation of small shopkeepers. We have a huge IT industry, but most of it is tiny. You know, I often challenge people to say, can you name one large UK IT company? And most people struggle to name one large UK IT company. And there are good reasons for that.
Demi Hassabis he has green card now.
What I was going to say though is that if you think about UK, what do you need for one of these large language models? Well, you need a lot of power, you need a lot of cooling, and you need it cheaply. You know, the processors are the same price wherever you put them, but the actual means of doing it, the electricity and the power and the cooling, is what we don't have particularly cheaply. And these machines are absolutely enormous. Am I going to the wrong slide? Yeah. So absolutely enormous amounts of power. You know, equivalent of 70 queries of ChatGPT evidently is a litre of water in cooling. You know, we just don't have that amount of power and that amount of cooling. Interestingly, as say, even Starmer recognises that we're not going to have ChatGPT equivalents here. No, it wouldn't be sensible to set it up in the same way as in the United States. You get the same tax break as well. But the interesting thing about Starmer is at least recognised you're not going to have first tier levels. You might get second tier. Interestingly, that Macron and the EU want to go a different way because they want to say, well, actually, let's have the data processing centres here. And to be fair, you could have data processing centres, particularly in Sweden and places in the north where actually it's quite cheap in Northern Europe, conceptually, to have cheap electricity and cheap cooling. Iceland's very good for it, but to have data centres because you open the window to get it cool. It's true. The point is that we're talking about enormous amounts of power and water to make these systems actually work. So I talked a little about kind of conceptually what AI does. Can humans do the same thing? Is this actually something that is beyond the capability of a human?
Speed and the volume.
Probably it is, but it's not actually as artificial a question as you might think. I mean, you and I do not have photographic memories. But interestingly, they reckon that somewhere between 2 and 10% of all children have an eidetic memory of some sort or another between the age of about 7 and 10. In other words, we don't train kids this way, and we don't develop their memory, their photographic memory. But actually, a huge amount of kids do have one, and they lose it quite quickly. It's not picked up on, it's not used, and that's not what we do in our education system. But fascinatingly, statistically, that is actually true. I did actually know when I was at uni, I had a friend who did have a photographic memory at that point in time. He was a lawyer, and he could do whatever he wanted when he qualified, because he literally could read the law and tell you what the law was. Interestingly, when you asked him a question, he was like, when he closed his eye and he said, well, Judge X said in this case X, and Judge Y said in this case something else. Getting an answer from him was actually quite slow, because he would, yes, he could remember everything, but then he started to put it together to give you the answer. So that really is the difference between the computer doing the same thing and the individual. Two things. First of all, that if a human, to the extent to which a human could do it, if you imagine that you could remember everything. Remember everything? Well, actually, there's something called hyperthermesia. Anybody heard of that before? Hyperthermesia does exist. You can look it up afterwards if you don't believe me. Allegedly, it depends who you ask. I've seen anything from to 1 in a billion, i.e., 7 people in the world have it, or 100 people in the world have it. And hyperthermia is essentially remembering everything. But actually, I think the reason the two statistics, the 7 people in the world and 100 people in the world, work is because the 7 people in the world applies to people to whom it's essentially eidetic. In other words, it's what you see, it's what you read. And the other 93 they remember different things. They remember, like, well, everybody, remember the faces of everybody in this audience. They remember what everybody in this audience is wearing. It's like they can put play a video in their mind. I don't know whether this is having a good memory or a bad memory. You could say it's probably a curse more than a benefit, but that's by the by. The point is that there are a very, very, very small number of people to whom who have a perfect eidetic memory and who could actually read. But how long would it take to read 250 million books? The answer is longer than the life of the universe. How long would it take to apply those 250 million books to the answer of, write me a 1-page summary on the life of Elizabeth I? The answer is that we'd never do it within a meaningful period of time. So yes, in theory, there is a human equivalent, but in practice, not at all. Not at all, because they couldn't do it within a period of time available. So, I say, depending upon what statistics you take, between 1 and 14 in a billion people have hyperthermesia. but it's not equivalent of what AI is doing, or what rather I should say, language models are doing. So let's talk about, I talked a lot about what AI does. Let's talk about what AI doesn't do. So, Lady Chatterley's lover. When I went to university, guess which university this was in a minute, but when I went to university, as a scientist, I was required to take a test in art. In other words, you couldn't study science at Oxford unless you also took essentially an arts test. And the arts test was called the general paper. And you had to pass the general paper. And the general paper was essentially to make sure you were around. If you like taking an arts desk as well as a science desk. I studied. I won't tell you what I studied at university, but it was a science subject. So I had to do the general paper, and on the general paper, what was English literature, and our English literature book I had to study was Lady Chatterley's Lover. That was essentially the English paper that I had to do. Lady Chatterley's Lover, very interesting book, 1920s, banned in the 1920s, about essentially the gardener who was the lover of the wife of the rich lord of the manor. Initially banned. Now, again, thinking about the limitations of the import, the limitations of the output, you can ask ChatGPT to give you a summary of Lady Chatterley's Lover, and do that quite happily. You can ask Lady Chatterley's Lover, you can ask AI to give you a summary of the differences between the average story in a men's magazine from the top shelf and compare it with Lady Chatterley's Lover. It'll do it quite happily. If you start asking to quote from Lady Chatterley's Lover, it will do it quite happily. If you ask it to quote from a story in a men's magazine on the top shelf, it will not give you the answer, because input, it wasn't input in the first place. In other words, it's quite easy to find a limitation. You have to look at things like, which I'll look at in a minute, DeepSeek, where obviously it's not going to ask you all newspaper. What did all newspapers do when DeepSeek came along? They asked it anti-Chinese questions like, tell me about Tiananmen Square, and surprise, it won't tell you about it. Well, that's pretty obvious. You can get bias in AI systems very easily because the input isn't there. This is a very easy example that you can do at home. Again, you drill down into it. Yes, it will tell you about Lady Chatterley's Lover, a summary of it, but you ask it for quotes and comparisons against that being the men's magazines and top shelf. We won't be able to do it at all because there's no input on it. I mentioned before about input in the sense that if you have a book, then the book is being, all the books about Elizabeth I, the books that have been imported are the English books. Are they French books? And if they were translated, were they translated correctly? The answer is, again, probably not. So the output is always going to be limited by what you put in the first place. So yes, you can summarize it, but you can't draw comparisons. And comparisons are very interesting because that's where I'm going to go to a little bit in a minute about why AI gets stuff wrong. I've talked already about limitations of foreign language articles. I could talk a lot about bias, about the human choice of the input. Somebody has chosen what to import and not import, even in these 250,000 books. And what the balance is in practice. There's a lot of study about bias in AI. There's more bias in it than you think, because when you're reading books, when you're reading a book, you as a human usually know whether the character in the book or the character that's being talked about is, for example, male or female, but AI doesn't necessarily know that. gets it, doesn't understand what is being talked about, isn't it? Is which gender they are, and that can sometimes be known in the output. As I say, if you apply this to DeepSeek, this kind of bias, then it's pretty obvious that you're going to, I say, all the newspapers went herring off when DeepSeek was launched 3 weeks ago to find out the obvious that it doesn't give you stuff which is anti-Chinese, but as I say, to me, that's pretty obvious. So that was a question. My boss wants to TikTok business accounts. Can you tell me about the security risks? And should we do that? And then that's the standard DeepSeek answer there is sorry, beyond my current scope, which is kind of a polite way of saying no, I'm not going to give you the answer. Actually, the more interesting thing is, I remember when we had lockdown, within the first 2 weeks, 3 people, and the 3 people is quite relevant because I wouldn't have done it for free if just one person had asked me, and it was a kind of a favour. 3 people. One who wanted to publish it, the answer. Another was the standards organisation. The other was somebody who I kind of owed a favour to. 3 people separately asked me, can I use Zoom? Is it safe to use Zoom from a Chinese perspective for reasons? Because Zoom was actually partly hosted in China. Anyway, I wrote this article saying, yes, you can use Zoom unless the purpose of using Zoom is to have a core, unless you're using it for a book group, and the book group happens to be your book of the month happens to be Winnie the Pooh, because of course Winnie the Pooh is banned in China. So, so again, unfortunately, I had all these clever questions to ask DeepSeek about Winnie the Pooh, but unfortunately I never got the chance because you can't actually use DeepSeek today. Why can't you use DeepSeek today? The answer is because it's open source. And because it's open source, a lot of people have found the backdoors and hacks to it. So DeepSeek has been, if you've got a DeepSeek account, that's fine, but you can't get a new DeepSeek account. They won't give you one until they fix the bugs. So that's been the case for about 10 days now. So unfortunately, I never did get the opportunity to ask DeepSeek about Winnie the Pooh. But when I do, I know it's going to tell me that, sorry, that's beyond my current scope. So I'll just have to do what I normally want to do when I find out about Winnie the Pooh, which is ask one of my next door neighbour's 5-year-olds.
Finally, it's on the X post. People did the screenshot and put on X. Yeah, you can find a lot of sample questions.
But more meaningfully, in the context of DeepSeek's been accused of distillation. Now, distillation is quite interesting, and it's a bit unfair of DeepSeek being accused of distillation, because actually distillation is how all of the AI models work to a certain extent. So what is distillation? Imagine having a query, going back to my query about Elizabeth I, right? And imagine I go into a room where there's a lecturer who knows all about Elizabeth I, because he or she is an expert in that area, that period of history. And you've got all these students, very clever students, who've already had a couple of lectures about Elizabeth I. So I go to the student, I say, Mr. Student, can you tell me about Elizabeth I? And the student gives me the answer about Elizabeth I. Right. And then I ask another question of the student about Elizabeth I. He says, well, actually, that's quite a difficult question about Elizabeth I. You'll have to ask the professor. And then I go ask the professor to get the answer. That's a bit how distillation. Essentially, instead of going to the entire model to get the answer, you go to a distilled, distilled version of it. And a lot of the queries you can ask, you don't need to get the big cheese to get the answer. The little cheese can give you the answer. And in fact, a lot of the AI systems, ChatGPT is understood to work that way. You don't go to the whole model because you don't need to get the whole model for those questions. You just go to essentially a summary part, what expression, a bit that's actually learnt from the big model, so it knows the answers to most questions. And then if it doesn't do that, then yes, I have to go to all these 250 million books. I don't need to go talk to them because I already know what most of the answers are, essentially. So anyway, DeepSeek has been accused of distilling, by which I mean asking these questions from the big model, which is ChatGPT. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but that's the accusation. To a certain extent, distillation is a known way that you trade anymore. So let's look at some other examples. These are, of course, it's difficult for me to do. I couldn't. If in an ideal world, I'd have done it on the screen. I'd done a one-page summary of Elizabeth first, and then put what was the word again?
Dodecahedron.
Thank you. In it, but I'm not gonna do that because it's too long. So let's do some shorter examples that I did earlier in good fashion. So this is AI and security. Thank you for the Swedish government who provided the text for this. This is a genuine scam message about you and you know, typical badly written English. And yes, you can put it into ChatGPT and it will perfectly happily tell you how to do it properly. So if you happen to be into these scams and want to do some scams, then please do use ChatGPT because that's not biased out. It will happily do that for you. ChatGPT will struggle with Lady Shelley's lover, but it quite likes this. Again, AI confabulation. Basically, AI confabulation is about making stuff up when it doesn't know what to do. And I'm going to give you another example, a more complicated example in a minute, because I'm a lawyer. I'm going to give you a legal example. But AI confabulation is, and again, easy to give you an example of. So there is nothing wrong with this sentence. It is an old English sentence, but the English grammar is actually correct. It's not perhaps the way you or I would speak today, but it's perfectly correct grammar. So if I go to AI and I say, in the same way as I did a minute ago with the badly written security scam, say monetary scam, because that's what it is, and I say, please improve this, it will do that. Actually, it only makes one real change, but it's actually quite a significant change because it changes the subject of the sentence, which here is the house, the situation that's near us. It's got about 6 subjects. It changes it, which is one. It's essentially in the first example, it's 6 subjects are confessedly allowed. It changes them to a single subject. The house with its situation, it's a single subject. So actually, it interestingly, to my mind, changes it conceptually. Changes it from 6 subjects to 1 subject. Maybe that's not a great example, but I'm going to talk about a better example in a minute. So let's talk about difficulties with putting my slides in advance is that I can't skip slides, which I normally do. So I'm going to talk to you about a lawyer example. I am a lawyer, so I'll make no excuses for giving you a legal example. What AI does very well, as I say, is it reads stuff and it gives you a very good example, gives you a very good summary of what it is. One of the things that humans can do is extrapolate. Now, I'm going to come back to in a minute. What's the next number in that sequence? We're very good at extrapolating. Actually, AI doesn't different. Well, it does have a different sequence in a minute, but humans can extrapolate far better than AI. And as I said before, AI understands, or machine learning understands absolutely nothing. We're still trying with a 302 neuron nematode to mimic that, let alone get a computer to understand what an Elizabeth thought. So it's very easy for me as a lawyer who understands concepts, to think of a conceptual question that is too advanced for a computer. Now, if there were a dozen, let alone 1,000, if there were a dozen or even half a dozen possibly, people who'd written about this particular legal question, Yeah, I would be quite happy to go off and read those and give you the answer. But this is a question by definition, which nobody's written the answer to. I don't know what the answer is. But it's not one that anybody's written to about, therefore it doesn't know what the answer is, because it doesn't understand what the question is. But you can understand it, or you can have a good go. So this has to do with offer and acceptance. So you probably didn't come here and expect a legal lecture. Can I borrow your pen for a minute, Colin? Thank you. So, sorry, I know Colin's name because he's got a badge on. Oh, sorry, I'll choose the person behind me because I know, because Marco. Right, okay. Marco, would you like to buy this? You have to excuse me, I'll have to sell your pen. How much would you like to buy this pen for 50p? You have to say
Yes.
yes, right. So I've made an offer and Marco's made an acceptance, right? Acceptance, yes, right. Offer and acceptance. That's one of the basic requirements of English law, and it's actually basic requirements of lots and lots of laws, not just English law. Scottish law requires it as well. I'm going to get Scottish law in a second. Right, so I said to Marco, do you want to buy this pen for 50p? And then Marco accepted it. In English law, you can also withdraw the offer. So you want to buy the pen, tell me later during the tea break, whatever. And then I come along in 5 minutes. So I should put the pen to you, Marco. That's fine, because Marco hasn't already said he wants to buy the pen. Fine. The offer, you can withdraw the offer at any time. So, question is, if I send an email to Marco saying, do you want to buy this pen for 50p? Let me know next half an hour out. And then Marco sends me an email back, fine, saying I'll buy the pen. Fine, we've got a contract. Doesn't matter whether it's written oral or in this case written in email. It's a contract. What happens though, if I send an email to Marco saying, do you want to buy his pen for 50p? And then Marco, half an hour later, types an email to me saying, yes, I'd like to buy the pen. And then 35 minutes later from the original offer, I sent an email to Marco saying, actually, I'm withdrawing one. Okay, I'm not selling the pen anymore. But Marco gets my withdrawal, I'm not selling the pen anymore, before I get Marco's email. In other words, the email's crossed, but Marco sent his email first, but he gets my email before I get his. Which can actually happen, and probably happens to you as well. You can't tell me that every email you've got has been simultaneous. It doesn't happen. Most emails simultaneous. So is that a contract or not? Is it a contract? It's a binary question. Either it is a contract or isn't a contract. So let's go through the example again. I've said to Marco, do you want to buy this pen? 30 minutes later, Marco says yes. 35 minutes since the original offer, I say I'm withdrawing the offer, but Marco gets my withdrawal statement before I get Marco's, yes, I'll buy the pen. So hands up, who thinks it's a contract? And then hands up, who thinks it's not a contract? I'll come back to your question in a second, okay?
About that.
Who thinks it's a contract? By the way, there's no wrong answer here. Who thinks it's a contract? About half the audience. Who thinks it's not a contract? Oh, interesting. More people think it's not a contract. Okay. So you're both right. The answer is the answer you're both right is because in English law, there isn't a contract, and in Scottish law, there is. Why both right? It has to do with interesting examples of essentially post and what used to happen in postal times because this did actually happen in Roman times in post. But the interesting thing is that if you ask AI to do it, it basically confabulates like mad. It has no idea what the underlying concept is. And in fact, the underlying concept, it says, is something to do with the postal route. Well, trust me, it's nothing to do with the postal route. It's actually to do with who bears the risk. And in English law, essentially the risk has to do with the receiver or of the receiver of the communication. And in English law, it has to do with Scottish law has to do with the sender. But the point I'm making is that it makes it up because it has no idea what the concept, what the principle behind the answer is. Sorry, Stephen.
I was taught that in English law, the contract only exists when an offer is made by the purchaser, not the vendor.
No,
And
no,
it must include a consideration. And if there is no consideration, in other words, if I offer you £10 for the pen,
Mhm.
and you say yes, that is the contract. So the offer comes from the purchaser, not the vendor. That's why if something is offered for sale in a shop window, it's not at a price. It's not legally binding until you go in and say, here's the price. Then it becomes legally binding.
Right.
That's the law of contract.
It took me too long to explain in English law why you're partly right, partly wrong. Suffice to say that the shop window is what's called an invitation to treat, and that's treated artificially as not an offer. And the reason it's treated artificially as not an offer is because you could have 3 people running or 2 people running at the shop saying, "Can I have that doggy in the window for £10?" And you've got the shopkeeper's only got 1 doggy in the window to sell. So that's kind of, it's artificial. It's an offer. But interestingly, English law, it doesn't matter. Forget about money. Selling this pen for 50p. Do you want to? I'll sell you this chair if you sell me your jacket or whatever it could be. That's a perfectly good contract. You don't need money for a contract. And in any event, money is not actually technically part of a contract. That's another story entirely. Let's not get into the law. Right. 2 last things to talk about, and I know that Darlem is thinking about pizza, which is 5 minutes away ago. Questions. I'll apologise to people who've probably got questions I haven't got time to answer. Last two very quick slides is law. Well, again, I've already talked a bit about contract law. Talking about more about contract law than you're going to get about copyright design and patents law. Is it lawful or unlawful to train AI systems on copyright material, like these court-opinion books? It's a completely naff question because it's already happened and nobody's going to litigate that. Fascinating case about Getty Images, because Getty Images are having a go at, I think it is ChatGPT, because as ChatGPT, can you produce me a Getty image of whatever it was? And surprisingly, it did provide. It said, can you provide me a Getty image of whatever it was? And they provided a Getty image. And not only did they provide a Getty image, but because if you ever seen a Getty image, and Getty Images is a very expensive, very expensive photo library, it put the Getty Image logo on for you.
Yeah.
So yeah, no wonder that was it. So it's a very artificial case, and it's proceeding in Indian courts. God knows what happened to it, but it's completely artificial. It doesn't really matter. A more interesting question about copyright is what happens the other way around. What happens if I ask AI to write me a one-page history of Elizabeth I? Do I own it, or does AI own it? Well, interestingly, we answered, I say we, the English government answered that question as long as ago as 1988 in the Copyright Zones and Patents Act 1988, which says the person by whom the arrangements necessary for the creation of the work are undertaken owns it. Owns the copyright. It's being the copyright. So who makes the necessary arrangements? I've always said to people that if you look at the average company, I said this in 1988, maybe I wouldn't say it today. In 1988, the person who made the necessary arrangements is probably the tea lady, because without the tea lady coming, nothing would ever get done in the company. I'm sexist about saying that, but okay. The point is, I have no idea who the person makes the necessary arrangements for.
There has been a case about that.
Recently, but you could have an argument about it on the Sundays. But that's what the law says.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to talk about patents. Time. So last 3 slides have to do with the same thing, which is artificial intelligence dangerous? So far, we talked about machine learning. I've told you what machine learning is. Is it dangerous? Well, yes. If you take it from a security perspective, and somebody want to write dodgy, give me all your money emails, then yes, it is dangerous because you can get people to do that much better than without it. As you saw in that example, it depends what you mean by dangerous there. Artificial intelligence itself, if we ever come to artificial intelligence, by definition, for me, it's dangerous. Yes, because if you've got artificial intelligence, why would it be limited to 86 billion neurons? The answer is it would be limited to how many neurons you could build in a computer. I mean, by definition, are we more intelligent than apes? Yeah, yes, because we have more neurons in our brain. And we're more intelligent than brute flies. Yes, because we have more neurons in our brain. So to me, it is a certainty. But don't take my word for it. These are the guys who actually write the original models relating to machine learning. And interestingly, they all think it's yes, dangerous. So you know, I try to get them. I'm not going to talk about the stories about it being dangerous. But what does the Pope say about it? Interesting that the Pope didn't like that photo. And his view of artificial intelligence is, quote, "It is the shadow of evil." I think it's a bit unjustified because I'm not sure that actually picture was. Yes, you could produce that using AI, but it could equally have well been done by a human rather than AI. I don't know who actually did it, but suffice to say that that was one of the reasons that the Vatican produced quite a long document about why, quote, AI is, quote, the shadow of evil. My apologies because I've probably run out of time now. I'm going to get chucked out. Question. No.
Carry on. We'll give you 10 minutes more. The machine says give Guy 10 minutes more.
10 minutes more. Okay.
It says yes.
In that case, we have got some time for questions. Sorry, Gary.
Just really quickly, I used to work in telex, which was after the post and before email. And it's about the culture of acceptance within the industry, because you always had a log file of everything that had happened. My question is, surely for AI to really take off, you have to have provability of, you need to be able to wind back and say, how did you come to that? If you can't do that, can we ever trust it?
Well, if you take that as a definition of trust, the answer is no, because the whole concept, conceptually, the answer is absolutely no. You can conceptualize how it's doing it,
Yeah.
but without you manually going through, rechecking all these weights and, okay, it's read these 250,000 books and it's therefore associated man hits dog with a greater probability than dog hits man, unless you could go through those 250,000 books and do it manually, which you couldn't do in a meaningful period of time, you can't check it. So in that sense, there is no inverted commas log. That's why it's called, if you like, called artificial intelligence, because people can't do it themselves. But when I say do it themselves, they can't produce a log themselves. Conceptually, I'll try to explain to you how it works.
Yes.
It's not the whole same thing.
Shouldn't you have a wind back function that you can say, interesting answer, tell me how you got to it?
Yeah, well, exactly, which is why I'm saying it's very easy. Once you start trying to break AI that way, is where it falls down, and you can predict where it's going to fall down. It's not going to fall down without in the lifetimes of Elizabeth I, because it's got all the same input data as you have. It is going to fall down on Lady Chatter's lover and comparisons because it doesn't have all the input data for Lady Chatter's lover, and DeepSeek's going to have is going to fail on Winnie the Pooh because there's no input data.
I would argue that a lot of the current LLMs actually do incorporate the chain of thought, which allow you to destructure and to understand exactly which steps are taken to actually come to a certain decision. So you don't need to understand all of the weighting, but you can actually have interpretation of how from an input they got to the result. As a matter of fact, I would say in complex decision-making, also humans sometimes struggle to provide you with the chain of thought. And actually, if you question them, they will actually probably say, well, I'm using my experience. I got a little bit by instinct. I let those things and not others. So in a manner, I would say the problem to me of whether AI is dangerous or not is more about the fundamental question of when AI will actually have and develop mind, meaning representation of the universe or certain parts of it which allows them to take actions without any control.
Well, in terms of actions, it doesn't. Let's go back to my examples here, because I haven't answered that, and it comes out of the question about producing meaningful answers and justifications. Anybody told what that is?
35.
Well, ChatGPT says 35, so it must be true. That gives me an
A
explanation.
double white line, motorway sun coming up on the morning light.
Anybody know that answer?
36.
It's an arithmetic sequence.
Sorry?
It's an arithmetic sequence.
It's what sequence is it?
It starts with 0 and then adds a 3 and then.
It's the difference between the two
Sorry?
numbers plus 2.
Sorry?
Difference between the two numbers plus 2.
That's 3, then 5, then 7.
Is kind of right, because that's the AI's answer, interestingly, but there's a much easier answer. That is actually A's answer, so I don't think it's wrong, because it isn't. And the interesting thing is what, because it's mathematically correct, related to the correct answer, which is an obvious answer. I think this is actually what AI says, which is it's 2 plus a sequence of numbers.
Sequential.
That is a much
numbers.
1 square minus 1.
Sorry?
Numbers in between.
No, add 1 to
1
those
square
numbers.
minus 1.
Add 1 to those numbers. What sequence do you get?
Square
You
number.
get 1, 4, 9,
Square
16.
Square numbers. Square.
5.
Square number.
1 squared, yeah, it's a square of all the numbers minus 1. Which to me is the more obvious answer than what your answer was and what AI's answer, which is just based on a sequence of 2. It is mathematically the same.
You're
It's
playing,
just
sorry,
numbers.
can I interject, please? You're playing games with language here. You provided no context for those numbers.
But you never do.
It reminds me of in the 1970s, I've forgotten the name of it, but it was a midnight cafe when everybody was pissed out of their mind, that mathematicians at the OU at their summer school would play games like that, and everybody would have a great time. But
This is the kind of stuff that you get in a kid's textbook.
yeah,
Age
Okay.
about 8 or 9.
and how does it contribute to, what you're proposing, I think, is a serious consideration of these questions. You've asked, is artificial intelligence dangerous, with all the issues you've raised about the definition. You've mostly talked about LLMs. You've declined to really talk very much about the application of machine learning or other types of deep learning networks other than the transformer networks that underpin most of LLMs. And you've not asked the question about whether people are dangerous.
You had a question, and I'm conscious of that. You had a question.
Oh, well, it was just going back to distillation. And today, as an experiment, I asked a question that I usually do because I train people on writing applications for fundraising. So I use ChatGPT. And then today, as an experiment, I used DeepSeek. And it was really interesting because DeepSeek's answer was very sparse compared to the ChatGPT.
Yeah.
And it hadn't occurred to me until today about the distillation of information, but is it also because it's newer and learning?
It's because it's based upon not 250,000 books.
Yeah.
Based upon, sorry, 250,000,000 books. It's based upon a subset of those 250,000,000. Or if you can imagine just asking ChatGPT the answers, or not have any books at all, you'll still produce a model which most things, most of the time, is going to give you an answer. But it's not got the same input.
Okay.
Last question. If you are on the working group to advise the government on AI from a legal perspective in order to make it good for society, what would you say?
Gosh, that's a very open. Yeah. Good a society. Well, I would say don't use it to try and turn legal cases.
Yeah.
I'm not a litigator, but 99% of litigation cases are about who said what to who. In other words, who do you believe?
Yeah.
And you can't use AI to
Ability.
determine whether somebody's telling the truth. At least I don't think you can.
I have a counter to that. There's this
Yeah, go on, polymath.
study
But
by-
that's not the same thing. What I'm saying is, to me, you can't use AI in a legal system, or at least not in a judicial capacity.
Yeah.
So that's what I would say.
That's what I want to know. Thank you.
Yeah.
Gosh, hey, I'm waiting for dining time. The cheese has arrived.
So thank you for your presentation. I must say, I think it's very brave to make the statements you've made about something that's moving so quickly. And so it must take a lot of time to actually, keep yourself up to date, to be able to understand technology and refresh your position on things. How do you do that? And how much time do you spend doing it? What would you recommend to us?
I would recommend IBM to you. I always found IBM summaries very good. But, as an organisation that gives you information in a succinct way, I would say IBM is second to none in terms of the stuff that I've read. But actually, gives you really meaningful information in a reasonable amount of space. Sorry, gentleman at the back.
I was going to ask what you think about ChatGPT and DeepSeek to a degree, releasing this for free for anyone to pick up and use.
I mean, it's great if you want a history of the life and times of where are you going to find a professor of history that has a specialism in that subject? The answer is you're not. So of course, I would use ChatGPT anytime to do that. Interestingly, I did give ChatGPT a history test and give the answers ChatGPT and in fact Cloud, because I couldn't get DeepSeek, Cloud, which is Anthropic, gave through a different question. It was to do with the history of the English, what should I say, British attitude to Germany and preparations for war between 1930 and 1939, because that was this particular lady's history specialism. So I gave that question because I knew she would know the answer because that was her specialism. And interestingly, she gave a ChatGPT 8.5 out of 10, and she gave 4 out of 10, and she gave Anthropic 8.5 out of 10. Which was quite interesting because the reason was because ChatGPT tried to give me the answer, which was an essay in 1 page constraint, whereas what Anthropic did was it gave a whole load of bullet points. So overall, it gave a heck of a lot more information in that 1 page constraint. But
I want to ask you about accountability and jurisdiction. A post-generated AI, post on social media with hate speech and discrimination, then it tracked down to the person or system accountable for this. But it's outside EU, outside UK. What's the legal challenges? I think the society and the government are facing.
so this is a jurisdictional question. Okay, so I'm going to give you my normal jurisdictional answer for anything to do with any technology. And in fact, I was kind of expecting somebody to ask me a question about, well, what do you think about the last AI conference that the French had a week ago? That was kind of the question I was having. I was thinking, I bet somebody asked me a jurisdictional question, but that was the question I was asking for.
Be awake at night.
I'm going to give you my jurisdictional answer. The reality of trying to control AI in the context of what the English were doing in last year and what the French were doing this year is it's not possible to do it, because how on earth we don't have a world government and we don't have a means of enforcing anything extrajudiciary. And I'll give you a good example, which is we all agree, I hope, that child pornography is bad.
Illegal.
Sorry?
Illegal.
Illegal. Illegal. Tell me what a child is.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the 1998, the European Union had a meeting, I think it was from memory in Copenhagen, about discussing what a child would be. And here we are what is it, nearly 25 plus years later, they're still talking about what a child is. So what I mean is, we can't even agree for the purposes of child pornography being bad, what a child is. What hope on earth have we got in terms of agreeing what AI is and controlling what AI is? Because we'll never agree what AI is. You know, I mean, it's bonkers to think that there, you know,
It's
there's
under
any
the age of 18.
jurisdictional ever going to be any world controls on AI, because you just have it down to the lowest common denominator. At the moment, there's an issue about the change in law in Iraq, where for certain purposes now a child as young as 8, as young as 9, which means that it's no longer she is no longer a child when they're age 10. So you know, it's just
It's a challenge.
you're trying to cross jurisdictional issues are just the lowest common denominator, sadly.
Yeah. Di, sorry.
Yeah, to say Stephen.
You can talk to Stephen later, but thank you very much for talking with us about this fascinating topic. And I would like to ask everybody to join me in thanking Di very much.